Welcome on into the Cougar Tracks podcast powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper, coming to you from a Marriott in Dallas, getting ready for BYU and SMU here in Big D. Friday Night Lights coming up for the Cougars and the Mustangs. And in this podcast, I'm going to be breaking down the game, preview of the game, and my score prediction, and then also share my thoughts on the SMU campus. And that's where we'll start things off in this edition of the show. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports as well at KSL Sports. Instagram, X, Facebook, you know the drill. And download the KSL Sports app as well. So this is my first time at SMU. Obviously been to Dallas quite a bit in the past few years, especially with BYU now being a member of the Big 12 Conference, but first real glimpse of the SMU campus, and I gotta say, first impressions, it's a pretty impressive campus, and you understand immediately why this school is able to finance itself and go 7-9 years without any sort of media rights revenue, because they've got money. You can just kind of sense it. You know, I went to Texas last year, and I really thought, Texas every building would feel kind of rich and powerful. I didn't get that vibe all the time. I wasn't a big fan of Austin personally. Obviously Texas Boosters got a ton of money too, and the resources at Texas are second to none. But SMU, for being a small private school, pretty impressive. And the football stadium's a bit underwhelming. Gerald J. Ford Stadium. I love to, the day before a game, just kind of get a feel of the layout. So on game day when traffic is hectic, I know where to go, and there's no headache and confusion for these new places. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to in being in a conference, is it's not going to be every single year completely new. I'm looking forward to, okay, I know what to do at West Virginia. I know where to go at this venue. It's one thing I'm looking forward to quite a bit. But SMU Stadium, it's nothing spectacular. It's relatively small, about 35,000 seats. I'm curious to see what the crowd will actually be on Friday and how many BYU fans will show up, because I will tell you, on my flight from Salt Lake International on Delta, a direct flight to Dallas, there were a lot of BYU fans. A lot. And some of which not very aware of their surroundings at the rental car shuttle pickup and just cutting people off and cutting in line and that sort of thing. But that's a whole nother story. Still, Cougar fans are ready to show up, it seems like. Be curious to see what the split actually is, because I'll tell you, around SMU's campus, there was no vibe in anticipation of this game. Now, granted, it's a weeknight, and the game's going to be on a Friday at 6 p.m. local, kind of a tough time, rush hour. I get all that. But I think BYU could really make their presence felt if the fans get loud and show up in big numbers to this game, because you have to think, after what took place a week ago against Southern Illinois, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some last-minute travel plans booked, thinking, you know what, BYU's better than we thought. They're a better team than they thought. But all in all, I thought the campus at SMU was pretty impressive. I walked into Moody Coliseum, the basketball arena. I'm kind of like that guy on TikTok that tries to walk around stadiums and find an open gate and get onto the field. I love doing that. That's one of my favorite things to do, is just go walk into a stadium. There was some big booster event taking place in the end zone that's being, brand new. That's one of their new upgraded facilities at SMU as part of their transition to the ACC. Seemed like some bigwig, fancy booster event, valet parking, fancy suit and ties, dresses. It was very formal what was taking place in that end zone in preparation, I believe, for Friday night's game. So SMU, the campus, very impressed with. This area of Dallas, pretty nice as well. And I'm excited for this matchup. I think it's a fun football game, and it's great that it's a Power 4 stage for both teams. 2 years ago, it was BYU, an independent, SMU, and a member of the AAC. Now it's ACC and Big 12. And you got to think, too, that the Big 12 headquarters would love for BYU to take care of business and pull off an upset against SMU because, SMU's been banging their chest about the ACC, particularly on social media. And, I'm sure the Big 12 would love their newcomer to defend Dallas because, this area is viewed as Big 12 country. And it'd be a nice win for BYU and for the Big 12 Conference to take down the Mustangs, who, when I watch them, are a good football team, but they're not the impressive team that I think everyone was expecting them to be coming into this season. It's interesting, looking back at SMU's schedules, they haven't won a game at home against a Power 4 opponent since 2010. That was Washington State. I guess you could say, technically that's not Power 4 anymore, but Power Conference opponent at home, 2010, Washington State. Rhett Lashley, as the head coach, has not won a game as the SMU coach against a Power Conference foe. They were winless last year. They lost to Oklahoma badly. They lost to a bad TCU team. They lost to Boston College in the Fenway Bowl. So this is an important game for SMU, and honestly, I think there's more pressure on SMU here than BYU. SMU is the sizable favorite. They're on their home field. They're staring down a conference schedule that, yes, the ACC is not great, and their ACC schedule is very light compared to other teams in the ACC. But still, the competition is going to be much tougher than they faced in the AAC. So they have to win this game. And for BYU, if they didn't win this game and they came up short in a close fashion, it's not the end of the world. But if they won, the momentum, the energy of this team starts to build. And you're starting to dream up, what can this team achieve? Maybe 8 wins is on the table, maybe something more. I hate the whole chase for 6, chase for 7 nonsense. Like, no one around the BYU program should be viewing we're chasing 6 wins. No, they're chasing 12 wins. Like, why do you show up to any game if you think you're just going to automatically lose? Now, us in the media, we can, make our projections and forecasts, but it's still so young in the season. We're still learning a lot about these teams. Does what Jake Retzlaff did against SIU carry it over to SMU? I'm really curious to see that because SMU's secondary, I don't think it's anything spectacular. They've been prone to give up some big plays, and maybe Nevada's a better football team than we realize, and that's got to be factored into this thought too. But SMU just got some real questions, I think, on their offensive line and the cornerback position. You heard that from the SMU insider earlier this week. BYU could attack those spots, and if they do, that could be a real difference in this game. But I want to see BYU's defensive line shine brightly in this contest. I think they've got to be excellent. Think back to last season when they took down Arkansas. That felt like a turning point for BYU's defense. They need a performance like that again. 3 or 4 sacks, impact plays, pushing the SMU offensive line back on their heels. Tyler Batty, Blake Mengelson, John Nelson, Zay Banya, Logan Latui. They've got to come up big for this BYU team. They have to. Ephraim Asiata as well. That group has to win this ball game. This game will be won in the trenches. BYU If they win in the trenches, they will win this football game. It's that simple to me. I think that because also with the trench play, you're setting the edge, controlling the quarterback run game. That's going to be critical. I'm curious to see what happens with SMU's QB situation. Preston Stones played the first 2 series in both games. Then Kevin Jennings comes in for drives 3 and 4. Jennings got a little more run against Houston Christian. Preston Stone's the starter, but both quarterbacks are dual threat. And Kevin Jennings is probably the better runner. And if Kevin Jennings has success, does he get more time? BYU's got to control that in this contest. They can't let those guys go wild on the ground. I feel confident that Jacob Robinson and Mark Collins can contain the passing attack somewhat. I mean, SMU's going to have their moments. But I think this could be a defensive game. I feel like not to the extent of the New Mexico Bowl, but, maybe first one to 30 wins. Maybe it's a 27-24 type game. Modest offensive production, but nothing earth-shattering. I could see it somewhere in there. SMU comes into this game with a 9-game home winning streak. It's the 4th longest home win streak for SMU in their program's history. And BYU's been known to knock teams off with long streaks. Think about Wisconsin. They had a long non-conference home winning streak, and BYU ended that. There's a chance here for BYU to end SMU's home win streak, which would be, if they get it to 10 games, it'd be the longest home winning streak for SMU football since the late 1940s. So they haven't had this level of success in a long time at home. And what's crazy is that SMU is averaging 53.9 points per game during their home winning streak. They had a game last year that was video game numbers against Houston. Obviously a big performance last week against Houston Christian. So they've had some games that have maybe inflated the numbers a little bit, but still 53.9 points over 9 games. This is a high-scoring group, but again, I think BYU's defense here, if they can control in the trenches, this could be a lower-scoring game. I don't think BYU can get into a track meet with SMU. I think BYU's speed is better than people give it credit, but still, I don't think you want to get into that game with SMU yet. I mean, maybe BYU's got the ability on the offense to do that. They're better equipped to do that this year, but I still wouldn't count on getting a victory on the road with a back-and-forth shootout. That just doesn't feel like BYU's MO. Like, that's not going to be the recipe for success for BYU to pull off this upset win. And BYU, you talk about streaks, they've lost 5 straight road games. Their last win, of course, was that Arkansas game last September, but they've lost 5 in a row. And they have not had much success on the road last season in Big 12 play. I had success going out on SMU Boulevard on Thursday night. Pretty cool setup again. I like the campus. I like the surrounding area. Went to the Barley House, kind of a sports bar place. They had an old Southwest Conference sign out front. Billy Embody from On the Pony Express from on3.com, he gave me the recommendation. He gave me a bunch of great recommendations, but I ended up at Barley House, and pretty cool spot. Got some wings, got some, just kind of like bar food type stuff, but it was really cool watching some of the NFL action, of course, Chiefs and Ravens. I think this is going to be a fun game, and I'm really curious, too, to see how much success, if any, BYU can have on the ground. SMU has done a nice job of containing the run so far through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, the opposition they have faced is nothing groundbreaking, but, Nevada, again, might be a better team than we think, and SMU has done a good job containing the run. BYU has to be balanced. They can't just be a one-dimensional football team offensively and expect to win on the road. SMU, if their talent shows up, they probably win this game. But the thing about SMU, what I've seen through the first 2 weeks, is they're not the most disciplined football team. They're averaging 8 penalties per game. In that Nevada game, they were a mess. They were, self-inflicted wounds, and reckless personal foul penalties, costing them field position and putting Nevada in spots for scoring opportunities. BYU, I know it's only one game, but only 3 penalties. I get the sense that this is a very mature BYU team. And I know cliche, BYU mature, but I buy it this year because of all the adversity they faced a season ago. This group's been through a lot. They've kept their head on their shoulders. No one has given them any high praise coming into this season. I think it's kind of hardened them a little bit where they've just been focused on the task at hand. I don't expect BYU to come in here and make those administrative mistakes that you saw a season ago. I'm not expecting that. I think BYU will avoid the penalties, and that could be an X factor too if SMU, has a unsportsmanlike penalty like they did against Nevada, and that 15 yards could be huge and maybe being the difference in a close game. I'm also curious to see how BYU's special teams perform. Last week, kickoff returns only 4 yards per return, and ball security was not great a week ago. BYU's got to clean that up. On the other side, SMU averaging 24 yards per return on kickoffs. They haven't had many. Last week, they only had 2, but they are getting yardage in the kickoff return game. BYU is not, and they're not taking care of the football. That's going to be important to shore up as well. Staying with the special teams, I'm curious to see how the punting is delegated too. Kind of underrated. We did see Sam Vanderhart and Landon Rico, and Rico's punt was kind of an afterthought because it was a blowout and no one was really kind of worried at the moment. But I thought his punt looked better than Vanderhaar's. And I know Vanderhaar's was inside the 20, and the ball placement was great. It was a 38-yarder, I believe. But Rico's got the bigger leg. I'm kind of just curious to see how that punter situation plays out. And I know on the depth chart it's Vanderhaar as the clear-cut guy, but even Kelly Papinga going into last week said they'll use both guys, and they did. That's something I'm kind of monitoring. Obviously, BYU would like to never use those guys and never turn to them, but at some point they're going to need to. I'm curious to see who Papinga actually turns to for that first punt because I kind of liked Rico's a little bit more, but we'll see how that plays out. Sacks allowed. BYU gave up 2 sacks. SMU has not given up a sack, and that's again where, SMU's offensive line struggled. Their QBs can kind of mask some of their mistakes. BYU's defensive line has got to get home, and BYU's offensive line cannot have the mental mistakes like they did when Braden Keim gave up that sack a week ago. Can't have that. Can't have any of those sacks putting you behind the sticks and kind of getting the SMU faithful fired up in drives. Players to watch for SMU, tight end RJ Maryland. He was brilliant 2 weeks ago against Nevada. Had a career-high performance, 8 catches, 162 receiving yards. He was the ACC Receiver of the Week in Week 0. Last week, only 1 catch for 11 yards. I got to think they're going to target him quite a bit in this game, I would think. I would expect that they're going to make him a key factor. Now, RJ Maryland's the son of Russell Maryland, and a football legend. RJ Maryland is a talented football player. They've got a good kicker, too, in Colin Rogers. He made 2 clutch field goals, including a 52-yarder. So there's a good kicker battle here. Will Farron, he booted a 50-yarder. Colin Rogers hit a 52-yarder. So both teams feel like they've got, distance where they can turn to their kicker, 50 and up. And that's a nice luxury for BYU that they have not had in quite some time. SMU feels like they've got that too. SMU took care of the football last week against Houston Christian. 2 weeks ago, they didn't. They were -1 in the turnover margin. That will be an area where BYU has got to be opportunistic. This defense, we talk so much about sacks. Takeaways are just as important. And last week, they only had 1. You want to get more when you're on the road to try to pull off an upset. Other players I'm keeping my eye on for SMU, Brashard Smith, running back number 1, 5'10", 196 yards. He had a big performance last week against Houston Christian. Kind of curious to see what his workload looks like this week. Elijah Roberts, defensive end. He hasn't been very productive from the stat sheet yet, but a preseason all-ACC pick. He's an impactful player. Watching how he performs and who he matches up against on BYU's offensive line, keep an eye on number 5 for SMU. But I'm looking forward to this football game. It's going to be a lot of fun. BYU, SMU, 5th meeting all time. The Cougars lead the all-time series 4-0. The wins coming in the 1980 Holiday Bowl, which ended up being the Miracle Bowl. Jim McMahon spoke with the KSL Sports Zone earlier this week, DJ and PK. That was a fun interview to hear Jim McMahon reminisce about that a little bit. I spoke with Jim about 4 years ago on the 40th anniversary of that, and similar commentary to what he said to DJ and PK, but an iconic bowl game, not only in BYU history, but college football history at large. I mean, that's just being down that much with only 4-something and change left, and to reel off 21 points and have everything perfectly fall into place. Remarkable stuff. Then in 1996, 1997, home and home, that was as conference foes in the WAC, the 16-team WAC, when all the Southwest Conference, I guess you could say rejects, came over to the WAC. BYU was in the same league with SMU. That 97 game was here in Dallas, but it was at the Cotton Bowl, which is about 5 miles or so away from me here in near SMU's campus. And then 2 years ago, 2022 New Mexico Bowl, BYU gets a goal line stand to get the 24-23 victory. So memorable games for BYU in this series, and they've won them all. And now they look to get that 5th win all time against the Ponies coming up on Friday night. Kickoff is at 6 o'clock Central Time, 5 o'clock Mountain. Pre-game begins at 3 p.m. on KSL News Radio. And then you can listen to the call on KSL News Radio. I will have in-stadium coverage on KSLSports.com and the KSL Sports app and on all of my social media feeds. So follow me. It's going to be a fun day of Cougar football. Week 2 already as the Cougars get set to take on the SMU Mustangs. I'll be back on Saturday with a post-game recap. And then, of course, Cougar Sports Saturday. I'll be back in Salt Lake talking in studio at Broadcast House from noon to 3, recapping this game and so much more on the legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio. Thanks for listening to the show. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a 5-star rating. It helps out the show a ton. I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.